What's up guys, we're going to be checking out the Eon 16-S today by Origin PC. It's got a laptop 4070 in there, so I'm kind of interested to see how it's going to stack up to the desktop parts and the other laptop that we reviewed recently with a 4090. Let's get right into it.
Achieve cable mod nirvana with CableMod's 12-volt high-power angled adapters. These low-profile adapters plug into your graphics card's 16-pin 12-volt high-power port and enable the power cable to be plugged in at either a 90-degree or 180-degree angle. Featuring a multi-PCB design and a sleek profile, this adapter helps increase clearance between the GPU and the side panel, perfect for today's wide GPUs, and is available in a wide range of colors, allowing for a perfect match with your custom color profiles. To learn more, follow the link in the description below.
So first things first, we're going to start with the specs of the Eon 16-S. So obviously in the name, it's a 16-inch monitor, 2560 by 1600, 240 Hertz, which is pretty interesting, and I like the aspect ratio. I'll get into that later. And it does have G-Sync on it, which is, so happy. The GPU powering that display is a RTX 4070 laptop edition, which is gonna have 8 gigs of GDDR6 non-X VRAM. This one was sent to us with 32 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance 48 megahertz DDR5 RAM installed. It's got 2 slots that are upgradable later on, user accessible if you want to upgrade it later. And it has 2 NVMe slots as well. Now this one came with both of those NVMe slots occupied. Both of them are Samsung 990 Pros. There's a 1 terabyte for the system drive and then a 2 terabyte as a storage drive. As for power supply, it comes with a 230 watt power brick. And the battery, I have no idea what the watt hours of the battery is because I can't find anywhere that reports it, and I didn't want to take this laptop apart because I wanted to get all my testing done. So yeah, I actually don't know the full capacity of the battery, and we're gonna get into that later as well because I did test it in a little bit of real world usage, like watching media and stuff online, just to see how it would work. And spoiler alert, the battery's so I don't think it's anywhere close to a 99 watt hour battery. All right, so past the boring spec stuff, actually one thing that I did notice about the CPU is that since this being a 13900H and the Eon 17-X being a 13900HX, I would have thought that they would have the same amount of P cores, but 6 sounded a little low to me, so I checked it out. Nope, it turns out the 13900HX has 8 P cores instead of 6. So on that laptop, you would be getting a couple more P cores to help with gaming, although 6 P cores on a 13th gen Intel processor is still plenty powerful for running just about most games. Moving on to the graphics card, the 4070 laptop edition in this laptop, obviously, has only 4608 CUDA cores versus the 4070 desktop version having 5888 CUDA cores. Also, the laptop versions are usually underclocked compared to the desktop versions for power and thermal constraints. So it's a lot closer to its desktop counterpart versus the 4090 laptop edition that we reviewed recently, where that was like almost half the amount of CUDA cores. This thing's 4600 versus 5800, almost there. It's only got 8 gigs of VRAM and it's GDDR6, not 6X. So it's gonna be a little bit hampered by that as well. As far as power consumption is concerned, the 4070 laptop edition is supposed to be locked out of the factory at 115 watts, at least NVIDIA's spec is that. However, Origin is advertising this laptop as having a 140 watt GPU. So let's see if that extra power boost is gonna help it with performance. At times by extreme, it pulled off a 5665, which is about 66% of the 4070 desktop FE. It's about 86% of a 3070 desktop FE. So that was the closest desktop card that I could find. We don't have a 3060 Ti around to test, but I would assume it'd be close to that. Because compared to the 3060 TUF that we have, it was 137% the performance of the 3060 desktop. So it's in between a 3060 and a 3070 desktop, about 90% of a 3070 desktop, at least in times by extreme. In Cyberpunk ray tracing 1440p, it was pulling 25 FPS, which is about 64% of the 4070's 39 FPS, and about 89% of the 3070 FE's 28 FPS, which is pretty respectable in a laptop that's 6 pounds and 3/4 of an inch thin or something like that. And to wrap up the gaming testing, I ended up using Shadow of the Tomb Raider non-ray traced. It scored 107 FPS at 1440p, which is about 66% of a 4070 desktop, which is 163 FPS. And a 3070 desktop got 119 FPS. So this laptop is again 90% of that 119 FPS 3070 desktop performance. So yeah, it's about 90% of a desktop 3070, which is again, pretty respectable in a form factor that looks like this, you know? So how does this compare to the Eon 17X, its bigger brother, with the 4090 laptop edition, which is basically just a downclocked 4080 desktop die? But I digress. God, it's happening!
Keep it in there.
I don't want to turn into Jay. So against the 4090 laptop edition in the Eon 17-X, 44 FPS from the 4090 laptop versus the 25 FPS that this guy with its 4070 could pull off. Only about 57% of the performance of 4090 laptop edition, which honestly is probably close to how the desktop parts are separated. That's about the same gap. It's actually a little bit better of a gap between the 4070 desktop and the 4090 desktop. Make of that what you will. I mean, it's not really that important, but it was kind of interesting to see that big of a gap and then go to check it on the desktop parts, and sure enough, there's also that big of a gap. We had a video recently actually talking about the giant gap between the desktop parts and stuff like that, so you can go check that out. I think it was the 4070 review, honestly, because there's so many gaps in NVIDIA's lineup right now, just performance-wise. I don't know, it's all weird. Gaming on battery power, I had hope. I thought that because it was gonna be a lower wattage part that it would be throttled a little bit less aggressively. But yeah, if you try to run anything heavy like Cyberpunk on here, it's gonna power throttle like crazy, and it's almost like inconsistent FPS is worse than just a consistent below FPS as far as the sort of power constraint, thermally constrained gaming experience goes. The problem with this graphics card is that it tries to clock too high on battery and then runs into a hard power limit and then gets clocked all the way down to 600. Sometimes I even saw 300 or 200 megahertz on the graphics core, which at that point, it might honestly be slower than the Intel Xe, Iris Xe or whatever that's the iGPU on this processor. So that was kind of disappointing to see that it exhibited about the same behavior as the Eon 17-X did on battery, where like we were getting the sound cutting out in during the Cyberpunk benchmark, and it was just all in all a really bad experience. However, playing something like an esports title, Valorant, Rocket League, or something like that, yeah, you're gonna be able to get away with it on battery. That'll be fine. One thing I did like about this display is that it does have G-Sync enabled. You know, I was worried when I saw the 240 hertz refresh rate of this panel, and I was like, that's tough, not just on the GPU for a laptop, but the CPU being this thermally constrained as well, because that high of a frame rate is usually a CPU bottleneck. And so with the graphics card and the CPU sharing the same thermal solution, it was kind of worrying to see 240 FPS or 240 hertz on the monitor, because I was like, I don't know if it's gonna be able to lock that at all. Thankfully, the panel does have G-Sync, which is freaking awesome, because you don't have any tearing, you get lower latency, and the frame rate can just be whatever the frame rate wants to be without you having to worry about like, oh, am I gonna get judder because it has to align it to 240 FPS or blah, 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 or whatever. The only slight caveat was that G-Sync is not enabled by default, and you basically have to kind of trick the system to firing up the discrete card, which basically launch a benchmark and then open NVIDIA control panel. Then you'll have the option on the left side to enable G-Sync. So the gaming experience on the Eon 16-S, pretty dang awesome. I like the 1600p display. I like that 16:10 aspect ratio, and it's enough pixels that if you can run the game at close to native res, or with any sort of like DLSS, DLAA sharpening, it's gonna look really good and sharp at the 16-inch size class that this display is. 240 hertz is amazing along the sea with G-Sync, because at that point the refresh rate is irrelevant. You just know that you're going to be presented with clean, untorn frames as fast as the GPU can put it out, which is great, all the way up to 240 hertz if you're playing something like an esports title where, yeah, the processor and the GPU in this laptop can pull it off. So all in all, I love the gaming performance on this laptop. It's awesome. It's good to see the right monitor tech making it into the right places. I kind of wish that this panel was 4K just for its media consumption and daily use and that sort of stuff, especially because modern gaming is so divorced from set resolutions anymore, because pretty much every game has a scaler built in nowadays. Even if it's not DLSS, even if it's not FSR, it's gonna have some sort of TAA upscaling scaler, just because most console games aren't running at their native 4K res. Console gaming has kind of made that sort of upscale tech be necessary in pretty much every AAA game nowadays. everything is gonna look great if you can run the game at your native res and then use an upscaler like DLSS or FSR to render the game at a lower resolution. But then the cool thing is you still get really sharp UI elements. You still get like you're not running into any issues with the resolution being not one-to-one with the display. All right, moving on to daily driver performance, AKA how does this computer perform as a all the rest of the type computer, which I like to call, because basically how does it handle anything else you would do on a computer besides gaming? My primary test for this is content consumption, AKA throw YouTube on and then let it stream at full brightness with a decent amount of volume. And then just let's see how the battery life actually lasts, because all these modern laptops feature switchable GPUs. You can make sure that the NVIDIA cards turn completely off and it's not drawing power, and you're just on the Iris and you're just watching YouTube. Unfortunately, about 3 hours of YouTube playback at full brightness. Now, most laptops manufacturers and all that sort of like thin and light crap, they always test like, oh, the brightness is at 40% and the speaker's at 10% or whatever. If you're gonna be watching something on the laptop, you're gonna have the brightness up. Like, it's just the thing. So I like to test it with 100% brightness, and yeah, the laptop pulled about 3 hours of YouTube playback straight, which is, it's not bad, but it's not that good, especially with how much room there is in this chassis. I mean, it's a 16-inch laptop. I was expecting at least 5 hours on it. My old Electronics Mag 15 with a 2070 in it gets like 6 to 6.5, just because if you're not using the NVIDIA card and you're on the iGPU, the battery performance is actually pretty good. But this one, yeah, I think it physically just has a small battery, and they probably could have fit a larger one in there. All right, so as far as the rest of the using the laptop as a laptop kind of experience goes, touchpad, very responsive, super awesome. It's a Windows Precision touchpad. You get all the same precision that you get from any other Windows Precision touchpad that uses those drivers. I love it, no complaints there. It's gigantic, which if you're a fan of the MacBook Pro style, frickin', it's literally bigger than my phone. Like, if you want a touchpad that's bigger than a regular iPhone 13, whatever the heck this is, sure, go for it. I found it a little bit too large, just because if you like to use your thumb to physically click the trackpad, if you're used to like old school trackpads with buttons down there, resting your thumb on there is also going to rest this part of your palm against the right click area of the trackpad, just because the trackpad's so freaking big that there's nowhere to put your skin without it actuating things. So honestly, I mean, like I've never needed to drag something across the entire length of like a phone on a trackpad, but I guess if you did, then there you go. If you're a low sense trackpad user, then this is gonna be a dream trackpad for you. I also don't like that it's only hinged at the top for the click. The whole thing doesn't click in like other trackpads do, so it's a little weird if you're used to trying to use your pointer finger to click physically. However, if you're just using touch, all of the tapping and stuff like that seemed responsive, and I didn't have any problems with it. Moving on to the keyboard, it's a little smaller than a standard keyboard spacing wise, because they had to fit the stupid numpad on there. I would much prefer just a centered QWERTY keyboard with actual like standard size keys and key spacing and that sort of stuff. It's not too bad, it's not cramped. I wasn't really making that many typos on it compared to a desktop keyboard. So yeah, it's a membrane keyboard, which is nice because it's very quiet compared to any laptop with a mechanical keyboard. It just barely makes any noise, even on the bottom of the keystroke. However, it's a membrane keyboard, so it's gonna be mushy, it's gonna be not really that clear when the actuation point happens, etc., etc. But I mean, it's a laptop membrane keyboard. Like, you can't complain. It inputs letters and it, you know, it's nice and quiet. So if you're using it in meetings and stuff or around other people, you're not sitting here clacking away on like a 1800s typewriter. Oh, and one other thing that I didn't like about the keyboard is the RGB is very not configurable. You get to pick between some preset colors. It doesn't appear to be per key as well. It's just kind of, the whole thing is one color and you get to pick what color that is, and that's about it. Moving on to the display for media consumption, it's bright enough for a well-lit room. I don't have any trouble right now, even with the, you know, our shooting lights, our production lights shining directly into my face. I don't have any problem reading it. And 1600p, aka 1440p if you're 16:9, is a solid resolution for it. I personally would have wished for a 4K display, just because I like being able to watch the media stuff at the highest resolution that it's usually available in, as well as like I said earlier, with modern games kind of being divorced from the screen resolution nowadays, you can always just render the game at whatever resolution you want, performance-wise, and then upscale it later. However, again, 1440p is pretty sharp. So it's gonna be sharp, it's gonna be noticeably sharper than a 1080p display for sure. 16:10 aspect ratio is freaking awesome. I love that aspect ratio for laptops just because that little bit of extra vertical space helps with keeping your taskbar or your dock out of the way of your multitasking and that sort of stuff. And it's just, I don't know, for some reason I like the nicer, a little bit more square aspect ratio. As far as audio goes, pretty dang good speakers in here.
Hierarchy of laptops.
That's a laptop at 100% volume.
Right up to 98C, and that's where it stays. But what you'll notice too when we do like gaming testing and stuff, it's not gonna go anywhere.
It's pretty freaking loud. Another thing that I do like about the speakers is that they have a little bit of a, how do I call this? Like a terraced or stepped kind of design to the speaker grill. So I do like that when you have the laptop on a couch or some sort of fabric or a bed or whatever, that not all the sound is going to be muffled. That was a problem with more than a few laptops that I've had with downward firing speakers where they only had one speaker grill. Because there's a little bit of extra space that this design gives it. It's a lot harder for it to get fully muffled. You would have to like completely wrap the whole front corners of the thing. And despite that, they still shine through, or they still blast through the top case decently well. So you will still be able to hear at least like speech and stuff, even though it might not be as clear. And I already touched on the battery performance earlier in the daily driver section. Again, kind of disappointing, 3 hours of YouTube playback because there's not really anything to write home about. It'll work, it'll get you done in a pinch if you have to use it for school or something like that. You might be able to get away with like turning on airplane mode, battery saver mode, lowering the brightness and all that stuff to kind of get you through a lecture of like typing notes and that sort of stuff. Like thinking back to my college days, which, jeez. I definitely would not have packed this in a backpack without the charger like I used to do with my MacBook. One nice thing about the brick though is it is significantly smaller than the Eon 17X's brick. So yeah, the Origin Eon 16-S, gaming powerhouse. The 4070 laptop GPU is solid, gives you really good performance for the form factor. G-Sync display, a decently high resolution display, high refresh rate, decently bright display, and surprisingly good speakers. The only thing that I would actually have to note as a negative on the gaming side is this laptop's fans. Oh, got a little bit louder. But yeah, I mean, this is my normal talking voice, and this is the noise that you're gonna be dealing with as far as when you're gaming. So the speakers are loud enough to overpower it. Like, it's not bad. And you know, like, if you're gonna be having this on your desk and gaming on it as a primary computer, especially if it's, I don't know, a college situation with a roommate or something like that, they might get annoyed. So unfortunately, it is loud enough that we had to make note of it. I literally have to wait for this to chill. There you guys go, the Eon 16-S. Again, awesome gaming performance. It's so cool to see this level of performance, regardless of what the name of the card is in a laptop. All right, guys, comment down below what do you guys think about the Eon 16-S, or if you guys have a laptop or any sort of laptop preferences, gaming, that sort of stuff. Besides that, catch you guys in the next one.